Welcome to Smithfield. Behind me is the beautiful house of William Preston. It was built between the years 1772 to 1774. Colonel William Preston was a member of the Virginia militia, helped defend this area against the Tories and some other people too. 3 generations of Prestons lived here. The last true one actually lived until the middle of the American Civil War, and the house turned into a little bit of transition after that. Recently, as in this century, 1961, it became a museum. That's what we have it as today. And with that, all those years, there's been many people living here. But prior to that, there were the trees. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We have a tree expert, Stipes, with us, and he is going to tell us about the people that were here a little bit and the trees that were here prior to William Preston.
We're standing here at Smithfield, which is a very historic site in Southwest Virginia. And around Smithfield here, we have a number of trees that we would call period trees. In other words, they are trees that were growing here when the Prestons lived here. And these trees, some of them are centuries old, and we're going to see some of them on our tree walk today. Some of them are as much as 300 or 400 or 500 years old. And as April has said, Smithfield was built between 1772 and 1774. And the few trees that we're going to look at that are extremely old were living here long before the Prestons came and before Smithfield was built. So this will be an exciting tour of trees. It really is, because I would call these trees sentinels of history. I also call them witness trees because these trees witnessed events. Not that trees have ears or eyes or whatever, but they were living here when historic events took place in this whole area. These trees witnessed the building of Smithfield, which I am told was built of oak, and there's a large chestnut mantle made from chestnut trees. We're going to see trees that are indigenous or native to this area. We're going to see an oak. Actually, we'll see probably more than one oak. We're going to see sycamores, and we're going to see maples. These are all trees that are indigenous or native to this part of the Appalachians. And we're here in the Ridge Valley province, actually in kind of the southern tip of the Shenandoah Valley. So the trees that we see here today are going to be native trees. But now if we go to the Virginia Tech campus, we're going to see native trees, but we're also going to see many trees that were planted that are not native to this area, as we would expect in an arboretum or on a planting on a campus like Virginia Tech. I might add here that the trees we're seeing here, the old trees, are part of what we call a relict, or they are part of the old growth that existed here before the advent of Euro-Americans. The Indians knew these trees well, and Mary Draper Ingalls was probably abducted along Strubles Creek here in July 1755, and there are trees on the Virginia Tech campus around the Grove, which is the president's home, that go back many, many centuries. And we'll talk about these a little bit later on. So let's go for a tree walk. Okay, what we see here is one of the oldest living things at Smithfield, and probably one of the oldest living things in this part of the old growth forest. We call this tree behind us here Quercus alba, which is the white oak. And this area is part of the Pleniplain from Parisburg over to this area. And this geologically is underlain with limestone. And it seems that white oak does very, very well in this particular geological stratum. And this is one of the longest lived trees in the Appalachian Mountains. The only oldest ones that I know of in Virginia would be the live oaks down around Fort Monroe or Hampton. And the tree behind us has been here for many years. I've been observing this tree now for 45 years. And it doesn't look to me like it has really changed much in girth. But you will notice that the tree here is what we call a wolf tree. And a wolf tree is a tree that foresters consider to be outgrown. In other words, when you look at this tree, it would not have the strong vertical boles without the lateral branches that you would see in a forest that are prized by lumber people. So this tree has always lived out in the open. And this whole area here probably had been cropped in some form or other. And we got to remember that it was the Indians, the American Indians, that taught the European settlers how to use prescribed burning. And I think that's very interesting. So this probably was a cropped area. And I think this tree has been here a long time. Now we have actually cored this tree. That is, we have taken samples of the tree, taking little cores out and counted the growth rings. And the way that we do this is we screw an instrument into the tree, we pull it out and count the growth rings per inch. Now, if we can determine the diameter of the tree, that's good. And then we take half of that, which is the radius, and we can actually massage the data. And this tree behind us now has internal rot. In other words, we could not screw an increment core clear into the middle of the tree because it's rotten on the inside. But we can still determine the approximate age of this tree. And so Dr. Dave Smith, my colleague in forestry, did remove a sample from this, counted the growth rings, and this tree we have dated, the youngest this tree could be would be 300 years old, and that takes us back to 1711. And Dr. Smith thinks it could be as old as 450 years old, which takes us back to 1561. So this is a phenomenal tree. It is historic, and it is one of those witness trees. It is a living sentinel of the past. And if trees had eyes, this tree could have witnessed the building of Smithfield in 1772. Okay, we're looking here at the stump of the American sycamore, known in Latin as Platanus occidentalis. Occidental, of course, means western. And this was a native tree, or this is a native tree, and the sycamore, along with American elm, alder, and other tree species, are what we call riparian species. In other words, they grow commonly along water courses or in damp areas. And this is a sycamore, and we measured the diameter breast height of this tree, and it is about 32 inches. And this tree is approximately 180 years old. I don't know exactly when it was removed, but it was removed probably within the last 5 or 10 years. And the time goes back to 1831. This tree started growing in 1831 when I think some of the Prestons or the descendants still lived here. So this tree is a pre-Civil War era tree. Very nice one. We have here what is called the Osage orange. And the Latin name is Maclura pomifera. Pomifera means it produces pomes or these fruits. And the fruits are very diagnostic for the identification of this tree. And when you check your range maps for trees, you will find that the Osage orange is not native to this area. It's more of a native in the South, Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas, in that area. And we ask ourselves, and this tree is 46 inches in diameter breast height. We did not core this tree, but it's probably at least 100 to 150 years old. We have yet to do to date this tree more accurately. Now we ask ourselves, in thinking historically, how would this tree have grown here? Well, we've got to remember that in this area, actually in the U.S., by the time of the advent of the Euro-Americans, the Indians had all kinds of trading routes all over the area. And I think there was a trading route up through here. And my guess would be that some Indians probably came up here trading these things for other items when they came on the trading expeditions. So that is my take on this. I'm not sure, it's only a guess. The other thing I would like to say is that if you have ever visited Red Hill at Brookneal, Virginia, the home of Patrick Henry, there stands the largest known Osage orange probably in North America. And we think it goes back to the time of Patrick Henry. And this tree, I believe in French, is known as Bow Dark, which means that the Indians made bows from this tree because the wood is very pliable, very supple. So this would be one of the trees by which Smithfield would be known. Probably not a period tree, but it is an old tree, at least by my standards. Standing behind me is a very large sycamore, American sycamore, another one of those Platanus occidentalis trees that are native to this area. Now this, as I mentioned before, is a riparian species, that is, it is water loving. And the sycamore that you see behind me is called the spring sycamore because there is a large spring there which makes life very happy for this tree. We measured this tree. It is 67.6 inches in diameter. And we dated it back to 1701 to 1771. Probably the oldest it could be would be 1701, and probably the youngest would be 1771. So this tree, we feel sure, was here before the building of Smithfield. I'd like to say a word about this sycamore tree. Someone in England in the 1700s crossed this tree with the oriental plane tree known as Platanus orientalis and came up with what is called the London plane. If you've ever been to Paris near the Eiffel Tower, if you've walked the streets of Paris or London, you will see the London plane, which is very resistant to all kinds of bad soil stresses. And we had them planted on the mall from the library up to North Main Street. And these trees are very, very hardy, very, very nice. So this again is a witness tree, and I feel sure when I look at this tree, I think I can see the Shawnee Indians carrying Mary Draper Ingalls and her two little boys and other relatives down Strubles Creek to the New River to escape the people that lived here. This tree would be considered a witness tree. It is certainly a sentinel of history. Now, while we're talking about sycamores, I would like to call your attention to the sycamore that was removed last year. The sycamore is located at the corner of College Avenue and North Main. And this tree is indigenous. It was not planted by anyone. It's probably been there planted normally and naturally. This tree became a potential weapon for human targets. In other words, branches of this tree began to rot and they became dangerous to pedestrians, primarily students and professors like me. And so they decided to remove it, and we dated the tree back to 1867. So that would have been kind of a witness tree because it was there 5 years before the founding of Virginia Tech. The tree behind me is a sugar maple. There are a number of maples that are indigenous to Virginia and the Highlands. We often think of sugar maple, we think of red maple. These are the common native maples, the genus Acer. Now the Latin name of this tree is Acer saccharum, saccharum meaning sweet. And this is the tree from which people get sap and make syrup and candy and so forth. This tree is a very old tree. These trees max out at probably around 300, maybe not quite that old, but maybe 300, maybe 350. This tree has a diameter breast height of 44 inches. And we counted 12 rings per radial inch. And this tree goes back 264 years. So it goes back to 1761, as far back as 1711. So this tree easily predates the building of Smithfield. So this would be a witness tree, a living sentinel of the past, and this tree could well have witnessed the abduction of Mary Draper Ingalls in July 1755. Okay, we are now located east of the plantation house, and in the background you will see an assortment of trees the larger ones of which we think are at least 100 years old. And we see back here sweet gum, and we see there's a small white oak that we don't see here. It's a relatively young tree, but we have linden and we have white ash. So we have an assortment of trees here. These would not have been period trees with the Prestons, but they represent different genera, different taxa, which add a lot of excitement and flavor to the landscape of the grounds. Okay, behind me now we see the large tree stump, and we see behind it a living tree. Almost without any doubt, these are period trees, and they probably both predate the building of Smithfield. The stump that we see in the background is 65 inches approximately in diameter breast height. And remember that we just saw living maple tree on the other side of the plantation house. Now, if that one dates back to 1711, this one has many more inches diameter than that one. Probably goes back to probably 350 years. And the tree, the large living tree behind me has a DBH of 46 inches. And it easily goes back 250 years. 250 would be a conservative estimate. So we can kind of be sure that these trees here, the stump that has been removed probably 10 years ago, that tree is probably 300, 400 years old. And the one behind it is at least 250 years old. So that brings us to a total of 6 or 7 trees here that were probably period trees with Smithfield. And these are treasures of Smithfield. They should be our historic treasures, and we will try every way we can to preserve them because they are sentinels of the past. They are living trees that witnessed a lot of these historic events. Behind me now is the remnants of a sycamore that probably started growing here around 1700 or somewhere about that time. It is at least 300 years old. It is probably older than that. It's difficult, as you might know, to date accurately the age of these trees, even if you have the growth ring information. So you have to kind of massage the data, kind of extrapolate, and you can come up with a general idea of how old the tree is. Now, if you look at this stump, take a look at the stump and you will see it is a very, very big stump. And it had a diameter breast height of 90 inches. And that is a very, very old sycamore. And look, it's right down here by Stribble's Creek. This tree probably witnessed the abduction of Mary Draper Ingalls, and it also witnessed the building of Smithfield. A very, very historic and valuable tree. Actually, it fell apart about 2005, 2006, because it was getting very old. It had developed internal rot, and as you might know, the weight of snow and ice takes their toll on the weight of the tree, and the tree actually just fell apart. Okay, we're standing now right actually on the stump of this tree, and as you can see, this is an enormous tree. It is very, very old, and if you can kind of see inside the area, it is all rotted out. And we suspect that before this tree fell apart in about 2005, 2006, that it was totally rotted on the inside. And the internal rot is just a consequence of high mileage. These trees get old. Living things are all programmed genetically to live a certain number of years. On the average, man's life is about 70. Certain trees have different trees have different ages of life, different periods of life, long spans of life, age spans of life. This one is probably, we think about 300, maybe 350, 400 years old. So before this tree fell, there was just a shell holding it up. And it was a lovely, lovely tree. It really was. And Reverend Ellison Smythe, the son of the Ellison Smythe for whom Smythe Hall is named, told me in his 90s that he came here as a little boy and played on the branches. So Reverend Smythe is really, he's kind of a link to the historic past and to this tree.